Welcome back to Tink's Ramblings. Yes, I'm in the armchair again. Today we're going to be looking at my favourite muscle cars. Yeah. God bless America. Can I have my green card now? As you may already know if you're a watcher of the channel, I'm a big fan of American cars, full stop. I blame my Uncle Tim who got married in a Ford Mustang. So we're going to be looking at some obvious ones, like the aforementioned Mustang, Camaro, Dodges, some other stuff too, not so predictable, because this is my favourites, not the all-time favourites. Strap yourselves in. But just before we start, I have to point out that I'm no expert on muscle cars, although I love them very much. So if any of the information that comes forth from now on is incorrect, it's because I looked it up on the internet. And if you know any better, please do correct things in the comments below as we go along. Always good to hear from you guys. So let's get on with it. Well, seeing as we brought up Mustangs, I thought we might as well start there. Why not? Started off as a fairly sleek looking motor, and this is going to be a kind of recurring theme throughout, but from there on in, as well as adding muscle, they kind of added fat as well. Everything got bigger and more ridiculous, honestly, in my opinion. That's what we're talking about here. And in the late 60s, early 70s, the Mustang changed quite radically from year to year, honestly, as did a lot of these muscle cars. So as I said, the Series 1 throughout its lifespan just continued to put on weight, culminating in the 1973, the Mark 1. A true beast of a car, massive car, even by American standards. And then in 1974, they switched to the Series 2. Shocking. I mean, not remotely in the vein of the car. I mean, it looks like a Lincoln Town car or something. Awful. Yeah, and it didn't get any better through the 70s. Got more choppy and square, and then, of course, predictably in the 80s, as with a lot of cars, which we've discussed in previous episodes, it got even worse, honestly. It just completely lost any character or appeal. Thankfully, in the 90s, they started getting back to some resemblance of a sports muscle car. Still not great, but a modern slant on the original, I guess. And it wasn't until mid-2000s, 2005, they brought out the first of the retro kind of looking cars. And I have to say I quite like it. I believe it was Gear did a really nice model version of this, just as a prototype. And over the next decade, they kind of mucked and messed around with that. Not really improving it in my book, personally. And then, of course, the more recent ones from 2018 onwards, again, the front is just ugly and brutish and massive. Well, I did a bit of Googling. Of course, there are the various Shelby editions throughout the years, starting with the 65 Fastback, the 67, now known as Eleanor, thanks to Nicolas Cage and crew. Frequent visitor to Sedona, by the way. Yes, gone in 60 seconds. Not my favourite. Never a fan of the rear end. Didn't like those rear lights. Much prefer the iconic triple rear light situation. And of course much later editions, which probably have nothing to do with Shelby at all, apart from the name. But general opinion is that it is the 1969 Boss Mustang, which is generally thought of as the classic and best muscle car that the Mustang has ever produced. I personally prefer the 68. The back end on it was quite exceptional, actually. I think it's really beautiful. Of course, it was famous for its role in Bullet with Steve McQueen, which the infamous car chase, about 3 clips that they played over and over from different angles. And whilst it was a little fatter than the original 65s, that fastback look is a beautiful shape, and it really does suit that British racing green, honestly. It really looks good in that colour. Again, probably helped by the fact that that's the colour of the one in Bullet, but yeah, beautiful car, and my personal favourite of the Mustangs. What next? Well, let's have a look at some Dodges. Can't really talk about muscle cars without exploring the world of Dodge. And picking up where we left off, obviously the Charger is a big favourite again, featured in the film Bullet. I'm personally not a fan. Again, the massive cars. Obviously it has some good bits. Those hidden headlights give it a really aggressive look from the front. The sweeping kind of coupe back looks alright, but it's all just too big a scale for my liking. So we're not going to dwell too long on the Charger front, I'm afraid. And I'm not a big fan of the modern versions either. When they first kind of got reintroduced, really didn't like that look at all with the twin headlights. Slightly prefer the more modern ones with the LED kind of trim, but yeah, not a fan. There are, of course, plenty of models in the Dodge range which kind of fitted the muscle car category. We're not going to cover them all. We haven't got that long. So let's skip all the Magnums and Coronets and whatever else and get straight onto the man in question. Yes, the Challenger. An altogether more sleek design than the Charger, that said. Not dissimilar from the Plymouth Barracuda. Oop, let that cat out of the bag. We'll get onto that later. That's pretty much what it looked like, the first generation from 69 through to 74. Then there appears to have been a 4-year gap, presumably when they sacked all their design staff and brought in a bunch of idiots, because they came out with this. Yes, horrible. Looks like a Triumph Acclaim or something. So that didn't last long. Well, actually it did. It went on until 1983. It probably didn't improve. I couldn't bring myself to look for any more pictures of it. So that's all you're getting, and be thankful for it. After that, not surprisingly, they dropped the whole idea because it probably must have been a disaster, and didn't pick up until some 30 years later, in 2008. And much like the Mustang, as opposed to the Charger, they went for a real kind of retro look, trying to incorporate many of the original lines of the original 69 series, first generation. And not a bad looking car at all, I have to say. We'll come back to that, but let's go back to the 69 for a minute. Not a bad looking car at all, honestly, and also famous for a film role, the much unacclaimed Vanishing Point. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's quite a trip. It's about a drug dealer thing. If you haven't, don't bother looking it up. So the 69 came with I don't know, did it come with a variety of engines? Big, larger and larger still? I don't know, you tell me. Probably a Hemi. After all, it's a Mopar. Anyway, this time around we're not going for the old school, we're going for the new one. Yeah, I really like these cars, honestly. I think they've done a marvellous job with the retro looks. And again, it looks really nice in British racing green. There was one that used to park in my office car park, and I really like the little, just the yellow flashes on the spoiler splitter there. And it's still going strong today, with all kinds of ridiculous, outrageous engine specs, the Wildcat, whatever, just crazy, phenomenal, powerful cars. And I'm sure a lot of fun to drive. I've never driven one. I might buy one at some stage. They're bound to be getting cheap at this point in time, the early ones. So yeah, great styling. I mean, just looks proper muscle, right? From every inch of it. It's got the aggressive stance, the aggressive front, the rear haunches. Don't ask me to pick a year, because I couldn't tell you when they made significant improvements. Perhaps if you know, leave some comments. I'd be glad to hear about it. But for me, it's the green one. Yeah. How girly is that? Well, that's enough dodging around. Let's skip on to the other Chrysler. Let's look at Plymouth, a wonderful harbour in Devon, UK. Thoroughly recommend a visit there if you haven't been. Oh, the cars, yes. Okay. Again, there's probably a whole bunch of models to choose from, but we're just going to stick with probably the two most notable. Obviously, there's the Roadrunner. Initially, clearly sharing some components with its dodgy cousin, the Charger, a very blocky-looking sedan, I believe you call them. Is that what, would you categorise that as a sedan? Oh, it's just a big car, right? Anyway, it got worse, obviously. There was the ridiculous Superbird Daytona version, which wiped the floor, I think, with NASCAR. Crazy aerodynamics. Gotta love it for that. Honestly, hideous, ridiculous, but certainly bold. And then in the 70s, like so many, they kind of lost their way. So that's enough of that. We're not going to choose Roadrunner anyway. As you know, we're going to choose Barracuda. But definitely not one of the early ones. What a weird looking car. This is the first generation in 1964 and quite hideous really. Available with either a straight slant 6 or a V8, varying from 170 cubic inches to 273. In 1967, the second generation came out. Wasn't a lot better. I guess the only thing that can be said for it in terms of improvement was that the slant 6 became a 225 cubic inch, and the V8 was available in all kinds of sizes, right up to a 426 cubic inch Hemi, of course. So it wasn't really until the 1970, the third generation, which of course looks very similar to the aforementioned Dodge Challenger that we've been looking at. Again, available with a bunch of motors, ranging from another slant 6, which was 198 cubic inches. It's about 3.2 litres. 426 Hemi, that's a 7 litre, and there was actually a 7.2 litre motor as well. And for me, it's the 1971. I think there's just a few little styling improvements there with the grille in the side fender, nice little design improvement on the front grille itself, I think. A properly aggressive looking muscle car. And so, from Plymouth, leaving Chrysler to Pontiac and joining GM. Well, it would obviously be rude not to mention the GTO, or the GOAT. Yes, more film rolls, Fast and Furious and all that stuff. And yes, if I had to pick one of those, it would be the kind of original, more boxy type affair, ironically, since I didn't like the Charger, as opposed to the later models, which just didn't really work for me so well, introducing the fastback and everything. Nah, I like the originality of the original. One of the rather cool, quirky little things about the Pontiac GTO is the inclusion of the rev counter poking out the hood. Yeah, rather like that. Is that the only car that's ever done that? After kicking the GOAT into touch in the mid-70s, it didn't reappear until the turn of the century. As well as the Pontiac GTO, this was also morphed into the Vauxhall Monaro in the UK and Europe. I guess it was an Opel. And in Australia even, as the Holden. Anyway, enough of the goats. Let's move on to the one that we really like, the Firebird. And here it is, in probably its most famous or infamous guise, with the enormous Firebird logo on the hood there. At least this is how I remember it as a kid growing up in the 70s. This was what I was most familiar with, and obviously not very familiar with in the UK. There just happened to be one in our neighbourhood. Now, the Firebird was actually born out of the Pontiac Banshee that we covered in one of the prototype episodes. Although the Banshee was a two-seater more in the Corvette vein, this is what it became, dropping the name Banshee in favour of Firebird. Anyway, let's run through the years. Firebird kicked off in 67, first generation, which only lasted until 1969. We'll come back to this one later, but throughout the years you'll notice a lot of similarities, obviously, with the Camaro. Not surprising, as GM stablemates, really. So the second generation pretty much spanned the 70s, starting off with that kind of bullnose look, just like the Camaro, ending up with more of a kind of wedgie shape, to be honest. from 1977 onwards. The third generation kicked off in 1982. And in this case, it's more Corvette looking than anything else. Very similar to some degree to the Corvette C4 generation. And towards the end of the decade, that wedgy shape had some of the corners kind of rounded off a little. Again, through film and TV, Knight Rider kit, as it was known, possibly one of the world's first autonomous cars. Because we're not including Herbie, because it's a VW Beetle. 1993 kicked off the fourth generation, and if it looks like anything at all, it's like a Ford Probe almost. So yeah, it really started going horribly wrong in my personal opinion. I haven't gone into any of the engine configurations just because there's far too many of them. But it started to get seriously powerful at this stage with stuff like the Firehawk thumping out nearly 350 brake horse, which doesn't sound a lot nowadays, but certainly back then it was. Anyway, probe-like or not, it got more and more hideous with all kinds of bolt-on body bits and ram air nostrils, and I mean, yeah, just horrible, honestly. So it's no surprise, because I said we were coming back to it. First generation is definitely my favourite. Either the 67, 68, I'm not sure that I notice any significant difference. 69, however, changed quite radically, and not for the better. And as I said, with the 67, 68, very similar looking to the Camaro from the same years. But in my opinion, prettier, I think, all round. More attractive car. I think the front grille is quite distinctive, more so than the just kind of flat grille that the Camaro had. The kind of strip rear lights I rather like, a little bit different from everything at the time. And whilst the overall body shape, roof line, etc. is very similar to the Camaro, there's just some little details like those fake grills on the rear fenders there. So that's it for the Pontiac, and it would be rude not to skip straight onto the Camaro, really, having brought it up already. Yes, we're not going to do Corvettes because essentially it's a sports car or a Grand Tourer, not so much a muscle car, in my opinion. You may beg to differ. So the Camaro kicked off at the same time as the Pontiac Firebird in 1967. Extraordinarily similar looking, obviously, body shape, etc. As I said, the front grille, a little less interesting, honestly, perhaps a little bit more muscly. So, obviously, very fond of this shape, but it's not my favourite. The second generation spanned just over a decade, 1970 to 81, the bullnose, and again, fairly similar looking to the Pontiac, which was a derivative of it, I guess. Not my favourite, but not bad, not bad. Third generation, 1980s again, yes, some deterioration in the styling, I have to say. Yes, not a fan of these at all. And of course it didn't improve in the 90s, no. Although some of my buddies in the Corvette club in the UK had one of these as well as a Corvette. Yeah, not a fan. Anyway, these flying saucers slowly developed into jelly moulds and ceased to exist in 2002, at which point the Camaro ceased to exist. Until 2010, when, like everyone else, Chevrolet decided to go all retro with it. And what a fine job they did. Just like the Challenger, I think they got it spot on, honestly, in terms of conjuring up memories of the original at the same time as making it look modern. I liked it so much I sold my Corvette and bought one. I mean, obviously I preferred the Corvette, but that was in the UK and I wasn't going to ship it over here when I moved over here, so I thought I'd have a change. Love that car. There's some in-car footage and stuff on one of my other videos, history of my vehicles. I had the SS V8 with a fancy exhaust system on it by Texas Performance, and yeah, what a great car. So of course it's my favourite. That generation only lasted a few years before they introduced this, which it's not quite as horrible as the Mustang's become, but it's certainly not as nice as the original retro, I don't think, personally. Not a bad looking car though, and of course, like the Challenger, all kinds of crazy powerful versions of this motor exist. Well, I think I'm right in saying that's 5 out of the 10. And I've been waffling on for nearly half an hour. I know, I've only covered the obvious ones really. I said there were some not so obvious ones. So how about we call it a day, and we'll come back to the other 5 in another episode, which means you need to subscribe down here if you haven't already. Of course, if you thought the video was any good, give it a thumbs up. Tune in next time for the other 5 and some oddities, unexpected items in the next episode. Yes. And what else? Oh yeah, encourage others to watch my lunacy.